Hi, welcome to the New Voting Project. My name is Knol, and today we are here with Katya Ehresman. See, I pronounced it right this time, see?
Thank
Just
you.
a
Yeah.
little behind the scenes, by the way. But anyway, she is a statewide organizer for Common Cause for Texas, a former assistant director of youth programs at the Civics Center, former chair of the student board at the Campus Vote Project, and has, of course, a plethora of political experiences because you wouldn't be allowed to be on the show if you didn't know. No, I'm just kidding. Uh, and you're also a graduate of UT Austin. And you're currently based in Texas, which is fantastic, not for you, but for this show. And thank you so much for taking the time to come out. And
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me.
of course. All right. So let's get into these questions. First of all, talk a little bit about your background, kind of what you've done in these other roles, and touch on your college experience at UT Austin. Has it prepared you for taking on, democratic assaults and threats to democracy, really?
Yeah, I don't think anything could prepare me for the breadth of attacks on our democracy that we've
Right.
we've kind of seen in the past few months here. But
Mhm.
yeah, I grew up a very low income single parent. Affording college was always a question for me, so I think that kind of inaccessibility really posed for me to fall into this fight for voting rights in a really easy way because I mean, I wasn't registered to vote when I got to college. I wasn't even thinking about politics other than kind of the personal experiences I had with policy and like how it kind of failed a lot of my community. And so with that, I fell into voting rights and someone asked me to register to vote for the first time and it was confusing. As I feel like a lot of college students kind of experience that when they get to college or when they kind of come up against our democracy for the very first time. And then once I kind of realized that there were so many policies and laws around accessing our right to vote that made it so difficult, I kind of kept seeing problems that I wanted to fix. And so then I got involved in local civil rights groups and interning there. So then it came into jobs and working for campaigns that were doing progressive organizing or electoral reforms for our election systems. And so I just kind of could always find things that I wanted to improve about the way that our democracy existed, especially in Texas. And UT had classes that allowed for me to learn about those things or take internships in the Capitol. And then I kept working towards trying to solve that problem. And unfortunately, I couldn't solve it in my 4 years at UT. So as
Yeah.
people have been fighting much longer than I have for this, and so I now find myself still working full time on the fight for democracy here.
Wow. Well, no, we'll give you another 4 years, and then we'll do another episode and see how far you get.
I
Uh,
hope so. Yeah.
yeah. But no, that's great. Having been a campaigner myself, I understand going from one thing to another. It just feels like, one rope and somebody's pulling on it at the other end. So no, I'm very, I thank you and commend you for the work that you've done. Uh, but I want to ask, out of all the facets, you've obviously worked in legislative spaces. You've done a little bit of advocacy work, and you've also entered the space of voting rights. But why enter activism and community organizing in the first place? Why did you feel this was your beckoning call?
Yeah, really, really good question. So I think a lot of it came from working with people. Like I mentioned, I was someone that was kind of affected by policy, but didn't understand the policies that were affecting my daily life, and that didn't really sit right to me as I was a freshman or sophomore taking a lot of these intro to government, Texas government classes. And the more I learned about it, the more I was frustrated with the kind of systemic disenfranchisement that we experienced, not only as a young person not being given access to my right to vote prior to someone happened to be volunteering and making that kind of relational approach to me to bring me into the space, but that a lot of my classes earlier in my life and the spaces that I was in for public schools or community centers and stuff like that, like they didn't teach me these things, and it seemed like that was kind of a failure of the state and of the institutions that I was in to bring that to people. And the way I got brought into the space was through organizers that happened to be organizing my college campus when I was a freshman my fall semester, that brought me into this kind of issue that I did not realize existed but still affected me so deeply. And so I think I realized the power of grassroots organizing, of peer-to-peer organizing, relational work, because that was what drew me in, and what gave me my first taste of it. And I think with that, when I realized that there was so much power there in my own personal life, I just kind of fell into wanting to kind of practice that form of grassroots organizing professionally. And I feel like it's one of the best ways that we can build power, especially in a state that doesn't like giving it away
Right.
legislatively or through policy.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. You know, I went for it, nobody really recruited me. I was too young when I done this, but no, I'm very surprised to hear that you weren't registered to vote. Knowing your track record, I would assume you're pre-registered. Like I'm pre-registered, most of my peers because I torment them about it are now pre-registered. But damn, that's tough. Um and so in return, I guess this is kind of your penance because you weren't registered to vote. So you just gotta dedicate your whole life to saving Texas and the
I
United
mean, we don't have, yeah. I mean, we don't have pre-registration here. We have like 17 and 10 months rules in Texas, which I mean, I personally don't celebrate my 17th and 10-month birthday, and I don't know any other kids that do.
I'm
Um,
gonna start doing that actually.
You should, yeah. But the failure was that our schools in Texas, there is a law, one of the only pro voter laws on the books here, says that schools are supposed to provide high school voter registration to students that are eligible twice a year. And I didn't realize that. And I graduated high school. I did not get offered to register to vote. And then when I got to college and I registered, and I was like, oh, this should have been done earlier. And then I realized that there was actually a law that said, like, yeah, my school was supposed to do this for me, but they didn't. And that was just very frustrating, that I was shafted that opportunity despite them supposed to be compliant with it. And it only was because of this volunteer that I was given the opportunity to register to vote. I think maybe tapped into the kind of anger, urgency. Like there's a lot of the kind of emotions that come with recognizing disenfranchisement whenever you hadn't seen it before. And I think that's part of the frustration with organizing in Texas.
Yeah, yeah. Good luck with that. I think you're gonna need some of it. Now tell me about your work. You were at Campus Vote Project. I've had a couple of their fellows on, I think. You've also worked with Civics Center, yes, to talk about those experiences, how they were. You're in the voting rights space, and now talk about what you're doing with Common Cause.
Yeah, absolutely. So like I mentioned, I realized there are these kind of laws that were in Texas, and I actually first got involved at the Texas Civil Rights Project as an intern there about some of the like kind of legal research in our election and disenfranchisement, and that kind of led me to get into the more policy side of organizing, because I don't think it just has to be like registering peers. It could also be providing know your rights type of education, and advocating around policies, and getting good policies passed or bad policies blocked. And I think now at my job at Common Cause, it is kind of doing that intersectional work of not only building power, bringing educational opportunities to communities that might not know about voter disenfranchisement or the kind of breadth of discrimination we have in our laws here, but also working to organize against some of those bad laws or uplift good laws in local jurisdictions. And so I wouldn't have been able to get to this job and to have this kind of experience without being at Campus Vote Project or the Civic Center. Campus Vote Project especially is one of the first kind of leadership opportunities I found my senior year of college when I became chair of their student advisory board. And I think that gave a lot of really cool mentorship with getting to meet a lot of the kind of directors of these national nonprofits that do youth voting work, and seeing kind of how the decisions are made of what event to do, and how to like construct these kind of trainings, and how to kind of bring the like 3,000-foot view of voter suppression and these big policy issues to individual schools or to individual communities. And that was really interesting to see. And so I think getting that, and being there and being in that space, and then being able to kind of lead the conversation that I wanted to see be had for those events whenever they're being created. I think that kind of just set me off on like, this is the part of voting rights that I want to do. And the Civic Center was a really cool opportunity for that, because my first job out of college, it was doing youth voting rights work, and kind of creating events and doing programming all centered around helping high schoolers navigate pre-registration laws and navigate high school voter registration laws in like 36 states. And that was the
Damn.
origin of what I wanted to do, because I was affected by high school voter registration laws. And so it kind of felt like it was coming full circle with that, of being able to organize people to tell their peers about something that I personally experienced the lack of without the organizing on my campus. So yeah, those are some of the work, and I am really excited about working at Common Cause and kind of seeing how we can improve the fight for Texas democracy here.
Right, and having Common Cause follow me back on Twitter, right? That's my priority.
Sure, drop your handle. We'll do
Exactly.
it.
Democracy is, I put that on the low.
Okay, digital organizing and democracy fights, they go hand in hand.
Exactly. I like the way you think. So no, that's fantastic. Actually, I think you've done an incredible amount of work, probably more than me. So you're welcome. I guess.
Thank
Well,
you.
thank you. Whichever one of those you want.
It's a high bar.
Exactly. Now let's talk about 2020, that last year. You know, I actually had a friend. I was at dinner the other day. I had a friend, and she was like, you know, my best friend told me that we're about to enter 2022, but I'm still processing 2020. Like it's so that's kind of what I want to bring to the table is what are your thoughts on 2020? We had a national election. We flipped a historically red state blue. You live in Texas. I mean, how was 2020 for you?
Yeah, 2020 was exhausting, I think is the word I would use. It was not an easy fight for us to do, to be able to see those successes, and it was also not a fight that fit within the calendar year of 2020. Like the kind of modern fight for voting rights has been happening for decades, and also continues to happen past the Shelby County decision, and since the 1965 civil rights movement. And so I think like the fight that we've kind of seen isn't a 2020 fight. Like it was a process of bringing this issue into the national importance for people, and that was something that it took a lot of work to do, and only because voting rights became more of a table conversation did I think we were able to see the successes that we saw, both on a partisan side of being able to flip Georgia, but also on an educational basis, because prior to 2020, voting rights was not a top 10 issue for young people or older voters. But now we're seeing it like not only a top 10 issue for people whenever they're going to the polls and seeing what platforms people have on voting rights, but it's something that people are being mobilized to continue to fight for after 2020, because the fight isn't over. I think the cool thing about 2020 is that we did see a massive amount of increase in voters of people that haven't historically voted in elections before. But we're also seeing a really terrifying response to 2020 of Republican or anti-voter state legislatures trying to restrict the right to vote in a lot of states that did see that increase, Texas being one of them.
Including your state is what I was going to say next.
Yeah, we are absolutely seeing that. And so I think it was exhausting during 2020, right? Like we worked hundreds of hours leading up to it, and for years prior to it, just trying to get to a place where we could have massive voter turnout, and to do that means having to overcome barriers to voter participation, and a lot of those are systemic and created to disenfranchise people. And so that wasn't something we could do in like from January to November. That was something that has taken years to do, and because we were able to get so many people to navigate the process that easily, and be able to make that massive turnout and historic turnout numbers, now we're seeing repercussions to it of states not wanting that to be a continued trend. And in Texas, we saw that with SB1 recently passed, the massive anti-voter bill, and redistricting also continuing to happen, and seeing the ways that they could continue to disenfranchise those communities that turned out historically. So yeah, 2020, exhausting, continue to be exhausting.
Right.
It's great.
Yeah, definitely feels great sometimes. But I would just like to say there's also the women's reproductive health issue happening in Texas, right?
Not just women, yeah. Anybody that can have an abortion
Right.
is now facing the experience of not being able to have it safely or effectively here.
Exactly, and I think that ties in directly with voting, because most people, when that came out, it was in newsflash, Supreme Court didn't do this, and Texas abortion bans abortions, most folks didn't realize the people who make these decisions are voted into office. You are casting a ballot, so they make that decision. Whether it's a decision you agree with is something you have to figure out, and electing the right people. So when it comes to voting, I always emphasize is voting is great, but if you don't know what you're voting for, if you don't know the propositions, you don't know the candidates, and that doesn't mean do calculus type homework where you're researching and you're trying to figure out which formulas to use, but it does mean becoming an informed voter, and that's where I think platforms like Common Cause, Campus Vote Project, they're so instrumental because that knowledge is almost a prerequisite to vote. But that's just my take. I mean, I'm not president yet, so we'll make sure that happens a little later on. Um, Now, I want to ask a simple question.
Sure.
Super simple. There should only really be one answer, but if you have another, I would love to hear it. Is voting important?
Yes.
Good answer. See, we can move on. No, no. Do elaborate on that if you'd like.
Yeah, I mean, I think voting is obviously important. I think sometimes groups do fall into a trap of saying voting is the only option for creating change.
Mm,
And I don't think that is true. Voting is important. Like you mentioned, educated voting is even more important than just showing up to vote. But also combating misinformation of groups that are trying to disinform voters. I think that's important. And to also encapsulate voting as like kind of the main mechanism or means of advocacy, I think
mm,
is dangerously discriminatory for young people that might not be able to pre-register yet, for people that aren't on the pathway to citizenship or are but aren't eligible to vote. There's a lot of kind of means of which I think centering voting is maybe dangerous, but that isn't to say that voting isn't important. Especially in Texas, like I think we get passed off a lot as being a red state and or a non-voting state. I don't think either of those things are true. I think Texas is a voter suppression state. And in voting to vote for people that believe in fundamental access to our democracy, I think is important. But there are so many other ways that we can and need to be getting involved in advocacy to kind of continue to break down those barriers to democratic participation. So voting is important, but I worry that we center it too much.
Yeah, on that note, voting is important. Yes, that's the right answer. You get a car. I don't actually have a car, but yeah, public transit actually. Climate change, right? Something
Yeah.
like that. Voting is not a silver bullet. It's not the one all be all kind of wow, you voted, you just won something. No, it is actually the first step in many steps to save democracy. That's a theme of this episode. I don't know. I just like saying that, save democracy. They should write a book and I should get royalties off of that. Um
I think it is a book, but
oh,
yes.
probably is a book. So yeah, they didn't call me for that. Uh
For sure.
I know, right? But no, voting is simply the first mechanism you can use, and then it's what you do after. It's, do you help your friend, like that volunteer who helped you vote, right? Do you encourage your family members to vote, or do you get involved in a campaign, maybe an issue based, maybe a proposition in your state you really like, maybe it's not a candidate, or maybe it is, right? Or maybe it's the fact that your roads aren't being built and your school's underfunded. That has to be the call, to action beyond just voting. Voting, I feel, should legally be required, but that seems a little authoritarian in a free democracy, something like that. But I think you can always do things beyond just the norm, and excel. And on that note, excelling, Texas is doing crazy in restricting voting rights. They're really excelling there. Um, I
Yeah.
what are your thoughts on this? What can we be doing? What do you do at Common Cause when you look at these things and you're an organizer? What are your thoughts, and how should we be answering this assault?
Yeah. Great question. Definitely the fight for voting rights extends past casting a ballot. And I think we're seeing that as a prime example in Texas because today, for instance, and we're recording this on Indigenous Peoples Day, we had two
Mm,
hearings on redistricting maps in Texas for the State Board of Education and the Texas Senate. Both are gerrymandered in a partisan and racial way to discriminate and disenfranchise communities of color and young voters. And I think that's a prime example of one way that we're kind of seeing the need for advocacy outside of just advocacy in and around elections, because the fight for democracy, the fight for voting rights, the fight to save both of those things does and will continue to extend past the sheer access to the ballot box. And redistricting is a perfect example of that. And obviously, Texas has found really fun and like ingenious ways of restricting voters. The creativity of their voter suppression this time around has gone kind of unmatched. I think Georgia also might rival us for the kind of most creative ways for them to suppress votes. But we are seeing that happening. But a kind of thing that makes me optimistic about it, and as optimistic as we can get, is that people were showing up for over 24 hours to stay at the Capitol to testify against these bad voter bills. And that is something that I don't think we've seen ever in Texas and in these voter suppression states that have continuously gotten away with passing discriminatory anti-voter laws for decades now, especially since the Shelby County decision by the Supreme Court. They've been able to kind of constantly erode at our access to a democracy. But now we're seeing that the people are not only aware of this from happening, but they're being organized and being mobilized to testify against it, to call their representatives, to engage in local governments, to work with their even county and city courts to be passing resolutions condemning these attempts to discriminate and disenfranchise voters. And so I think we're seeing a lot of awakenings among people that may have not paid attention to voter suppression before, though this is definitely not the first time Texas or any state has tried to pass these anti-voter bills. And we're seeing a lot more mobilization around it. So for Common Cause, what we do is we have the legal team. We have a lot of wonky people on staff that kind of researches. I don't know if they like being self-called wonky, but I mean it's a wonky organization. We do a lot of report creation. We help work on the litigation side. We sue Texas multiple times a year, it seems, over a lot of these problematic and discriminatory and unconstitutional laws, honestly. But the other side of that is we try to kind of contextualize that information into something that is accessible for people. So we take it and then we do kind of public education events or know your rights trainings and election protection and create opportunities for people to get involved in the fight for secure and accessible elections. And part of that is doing legislative advocacy too. So we did an advocacy day training where we mobilized some of our 50,000 members to come to the Capitol during the many fights and hearings on the anti-voter bill last special session, and to know about the bill, to be able to speak about the bill, answer questions about the bill in ways that a lot of laymen don't have the capacity to do and don't spend their hours a day working outside of work thinking about voting rights. We help crystallize that information to a digestible way, and then we train them to testify. And that's I think a really cool opportunity that Common Cause brings to the table of kind of allowing for people to get engaged in other parts of democratic advocacy that aren't just voting for people that are pro-voter or pro-voting rights or pro-democracy, though we also do encourage that whenever it is time for elections.
It's good to encourage that. I agree. No, that sounds like great stuff. Honestly, I don't have any response to that. I mean, you should hire me or sponsor me. That's a separate conversation.
Sure, yeah.
Exactly.
We'll talk about that after.
Exactly. But I kind of want to close with a question I ask all my guests. And since you're my favorite guest, no, I'm just playing. We don't play favorites on this show.
Nah.
To stay nonpartisan. No. What what is your advice? What is your recommendation to Gen Z? You're Gen Z, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, you're young.
Yeah.
You're like 16, sure. Not actually, but sure.
22, but yeah.
22? You don't look 22.
You.
But what is your advice to us, I guess? Wait, so now you're just speaking to us. Gen Z, it's a very ambiguous term, Gen Z. I don't know where they got Z. Don't know who is the Z. Anyway, there's a lot of questions I have about that. But how can we stay engaged? And not just us, but there are some folks that are ignorant. some folks that are alienated, exhausted, maybe like yourself 5-ish years ago when you were in an underserved community and you didn't even know that you had to be registered to vote. What is your advice to the graduating class of voters who are going to be making our decisions?
Yeah, I think there's kind of two parts of the advice. It's one, it's is that it's okay to be angry. The system is constructed in a way and is continuing to be propped up in a way that does not want young people, people of color, low income people to have a large sustained voice in deciding the policies that are elected inside of our democracy. And so I think it is okay to be angry. I think a lot of people like kind of patronize or demean teenagers, young people, Gen Z, whatever kind of title we want to encapsulate that
Right?
age.
See, it's kind of confusing, right? Gen Z, what is anyway,
Yeah.
continue.
But I think people like to kind of patronize young people and be like, "Oh, you should be more engaged, or you shouldn't be so angry, or why
Mm.
are you protesting all the time?" And I think we
Why
have
are you
grown.
protesting all the time?
Yeah, I do live in Texas, so maybe these are patronizing comments that young people hear more than across the country. But I think, yeah, it's kind of an experience the young people have where it's like you should care more, but also like why are you so angry all the time? And I think
Right.
the way that we've grown up in kind of watching events of our lives, like we have seen natural disasters every year of our life. We have seen police brutality every year of our life, and we see these things and they become both normalized but also kind of questionable about why we should be normalizing these things that should not be the case in what we get taught as the greatest country in the world. And so I think the first piece of advice is it's okay to be angry, that we shouldn't be okay with seeing a lot of these kind of in behaviors or in events of the world and of our country continue to play out, but also to maybe like tap into that anger and use it in a productive way, because I don't think that there is any space that young people A shouldn't be in and B shouldn't be leading, and that includes the fight for voting rights. It includes campaign organizing. That includes political strategy. I mean, anything. Young people should be leading it, especially because we're experiencing the brunt of our decisions for decades to come. And so I would say if there's anything that people are angry about, like see who the decision makers are for that, see what groups are or organizing around it, or who is maybe advocating for those things. Like do a little bit of research about it, or go attend a protest and ask who is leading it, and maybe just continue to get involved in seeing what rooms you can put yourself into, because a lot of times I've noticed the doors won't necessarily be opened for young people. Sometimes you just have to keep knocking on them, and no matter what kind of issue a young person cares about, like if you just do a little bit of work, or you see a way that you can maybe start getting involved in an issue, like do it, and then like take it on yourself to lead, and I think that's going to be the best way that we create change, and that's going to be the best way that we see change is more young people being leaders. And for non-young people listening to this, I think the doors should be opened and spaces should be made at all of the tables for young people. And that means putting young people on advisory boards, putting young people on board of directors, putting young people in organizing staff and in like leadership staff. And I think even just uplifting into any kind of position to be in those rooms, it will be really important, because we have not only pertinent insight to how we've experienced policy and organizing, but we'll have insight into how we need to see policy exist for longer than boomers will experience in their lives and their lived experience. So yeah, that's probably the two pieces of advice: is it's okay to be angry, and use that anger to just make room for yourself and keep pushing your way into doors.
I like that, the doors. I can tell you as a fact, I was not respected at all when I came into this world. Now, I think
Right.
I have some credibility, varies from person to person. It's still tough for me to get into some doors. And maybe that's like the liquor store door, probably shouldn't be there, but the political doors, I mean, some of them are still closed. Everybody has heavy gatekeepers, and it's my job to be petulant and annoy the shit out of them until somebody returns my goddamn email. And
Yeah.
yes, I'm talking about the Attorney General of California, but he's not listening to this yet. Um, so thank you for that. Is there anything you'd like to add? Maybe you want to plug your socials. This is the time where you get to tell us, what your handles are. I'll put everything in the description that you want. But socials.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I would say that Texas is ground zero for the fight for voting rights right now, especially as we are in our third special session as we're filming this, and most likely we'll have a fourth by the beginning of next year. So if you want to stay up to date about the fight for voting rights in Texas and get involved, go follow Common Cause Texas on all social media platforms. We have Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, all at I think C Cause Texas or Common Cause Texas.
Mhm.
We're on TikTok now, which is exciting.
That's not
Don't have
exciting.
much
That's just
content.
weird.
We don't have much content. We will,
Oh,
hopefully.
you will. Okay. Totally
Common
looking
Cause
forward to that.
nationally is also great. We have a Common Cause California. They do amazing work.
Mm.
So would just highly encourage anybody getting involved in Common Cause if they care about the fight for accessible and free democracy. And then, yeah, if anybody wants to stay in touch, you can have my email and put it wherever you need to. I am always happy to bring young people into the fight for voting rights and open any door I can have and find. So, yeah, that's probably it. I don't know if yeah, I think
Yeah,
it's
I think that's enough. Uh, so no, thank you so much for coming on the show, bringing your perspective. It's very valuable, and I hope you had a great time.
yeah.
And you're always welcome back. Anytime, maybe you're running for office. Who knows? Maybe I don't.
Don't see that in my future, but
Don't see
thanks.
that in your future. Well, I see it in yours. So when that happens, you can be back on the show. Um, and do please do continue the good fight because you're doing amazing stuff.
Likewise, thank you so much for having this conversation and having all of these conversations. The bringing
Stop,
voting rights to young
stop
people
it!
is so
Stop
important.
it!
We're just
I
gonna go
know,
back and forth about this. It's gonna be great.
I know. It's great. No, I'm playing. So no. Again, thank you, and I do wish you the best of luck.
Likewise, thanks.